RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers. Hello, and welcome to RevOpsAF, the podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Camela Thompson, and today I am joined by James McArthur. James, tell us a little bit about your background.
It's great to be here. I'm James McArthur. I'm the head of RevOps at New. We are a Salesforce native revenue lifecycle management platform. Been here about 2 years. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you about all the ways you should be thinking about CPQ and then all the ways you can mess up thinking about CPQ before you actually need a CPQ.
And I am excited to have you here to talk about this because, to be totally honest, when we say the initials and not acronym, CPQ, we see a lot of people cringe because a lot of times they're working with legacy products that were originally intended for manufacturing, and it gets really frustrating really fast. But there's a lot of ways to mess this up, right? If you're a new admin, don't really have the experience running into a CPQ platform, there's a lot you can do with your implementation to make it screwy. What are some of the most frequent missteps you see companies make? Maybe it's not anything to do with Salesforce, but what are the things you see really hang people up if they want CPQ?
Probably the biggest one is they're buying a CPQ too early. That's a thing we run into a lot during our sales processes, which is company had hired their first head of sales, their first VP of sales, CRO. That person came in and said, we need a CPQ. Now, this company is 5 to 10 million, maybe 20 million in revenue. They've got very few products in their org, and their quoting process is fairly straight line. Realistically, the problems they have are doc gen and finance, and move to finance. And we see a lot of companies that in that point really over-engineer and start building out the tool set they don't need until later. The reality is most companies, you don't need CPQ until you're pretty far down the road. The second biggest issue is that for those companies that adopt CPQ too early, they don't institute rigidity within the process, because the reality is quoting opportunities should be a highway. Every single one of your reps should be going through 90% of the time. The 10% where you need adjustments, that's where you pick things up. It's only when that 10% gets really, really onerous that you need a CPQ. And so companies don't build that highway. They don't understand the data behind that highway. So they end up at a growth stage where they're starting to get audited on a rather serious level, or they're pre-IPO, and they realize they don't have any of the data they need to actually be able to do the reporting that at this point they are required to do by either investors, the market itself, or any of our governance bodies that certain companies work with. And so the biggest areas are really choosing too early, and when you do, not thinking about it intentionally and not building the process in so that when you go out, you can actually do clean subscription reporting, clean finance reporting.
Yeah, this is resonating. And as a contractor, a lot of people pull me in when they're desperate, and they've done some wild things, like not use the standard opportunity object. Why? So when it comes to simplicity, particularly for a SaaS business, I come back from the days when there were still physical objects being sold and you had quite a few SKUs. But in the days of software, you would think that licensing, things are pretty straightforward. That said, what are some other, we'll start with configuration and then move to pricing models that complicate things. What are some other configuration SNAFUs outside of going rogue and inventing your own objects that can throw this sideways?
So from a configuration side, the biggest thing is use the opportunity, use opportunity products. If you need variability, use quote lines. They're standard objects. They're easy. There's a pipeline built there. Go ahead, start using them. The other big things that people trip over, literally fall on their face afterwards, is over-engineering the renewal process, over-engineering midterm changes, or trying to build into their application when they don't have something to support it, because everyone's moving to PLG. Everyone wants people to be able to buy through their website. And we've talked to companies that get their engineering team to build this entire flow around purchasing and literally take 6 to 8 weeks for them to get a single pricing change through. On the Salesforce side, don't over-index on formula fields. I know it feels like you should because it's easy and you can see it and it looks great. It's not affordable, it's not exportable, and at the end of the day, when you're moving over to a CPQ, you have to go figure out what that field is calculating, because at the end of the day, formula fields aren't data. They're literally metadata that gets populated on save. Don't use formula fields in your quoting process for anything that's going to be reported on. I understand most of your reporting's in Salesforce. Don't do it. It just makes life harder at the end. Second configuration thing, don't conflate CPQ, which is configure, price, quote, with DocGen. So we get a lot of companies that come in and the huge thing they do is they'll say, well, I want this to display. I want this to display. And we end up having to ask, so is this a quoting problem? At the point where it's presentation to the customer, that's literally just quote. If there are pricing issues, and this is getting into your second piece, which is what kind of models should you be thinking about CPQ? Because there are instances where a small company needs a CPQ. Manufacturing, which you were talking about, is great. New is not a manufacturing CPQ. There are plenty of great ones out there. Feel free to reach out to me and I will put you in the right direction. Other models where you might want to think about that quoting problem that I just talked about isn't actually a quoting problem. Are you doing cash burn down? Are you doing credit burn? Are you doing usage? Like usage, which is a component of cash and credit burn down, is the process. And to explain these, usage is every time your customer uses a product, you incrementally charge them for that usage. Cash burn down is customer signs up at the beginning of a period, pays in a certain amount, and then as they use that product, it draws down the pool of cash. Credit is you're converting those usage into units. So if someone does 1,000 API calls, that equals 1 credit. You would then sell that credit as a subscription to the customer. The customer can buy 30 credits up front and get their 30,000 API calls. Those are those 3 models. They're very hard to get right on custom config. And by very hard, I mean, don't try. Get a system for it the moment you go into those things. From subscription standpoint, if you're running a pure SaaS business, don't overcomplicate your life, like to the point of, even if you have ProServe on top of it, SaaS is literally like, if you sell a product, it has a start date, has an end date, you figure it out over the term, you get a basic RevRec solution, that'll solve AFC 606, you get a base quoting solution, that'll solve your quoting, and then send it to your finance team to build. Until you get to a certain level of complexity on SaaS, i.e. you have multiple different teams running, there's really no reason to get too complicated. It's once you start getting into ProServe, you start getting into milestones, or you get into these really complicated bundles where you'll have 7 or 8 nested products within a bundle. Some of them required, some of them optional. You need to have variability in pricing or fulcrum pricing where it's percentage total, or you need to be able to do a quoted number per bundle. There are a lot of different variabilities in there, but the reality is until your finance team is screaming at you to get a CPQ, or you're starting to feel like I actually need visibility into what these subscriptions are doing because midterm changes are coming up a lot. Do a lot of things on that side. Don't wait till your finance team is screaming. Wait until there's like a murmur. If they're screaming, you're too late.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
that's where I know I answered a lot of your question there.
I appreciate it. I could tell you're the perfect sales engineer because you're telling people when to and when not to, which is just as important as buy my solution. It builds trust and it's fantastic. I am going to date myself again. I remember when these pricing models are often pushed upon the executive team by board members who see it done elsewhere or read about it in HBR or, fill in the blanks. I was around back when usage-based pricing was first being emphasized in the boardroom. And I remember our CEO came to us and said, we're doing usage-based pricing without any thought to the infrastructure necessary, like tracking usage. It's a little frustrating. I see the same thing happening with PLG. If you could advise a CEO when PLG or usage is appropriate and is not appropriate, what would you tell them?
Unless you're high transaction volume and low ACV, PLG is likely not going to be a direction you're going to want to go. E-commerce conquered this a long time ago. B2C companies conquered this a long time ago. If you're not doing heavy discounting on the back end, if you don't have bespoke pricing, if your people come in and they buy 10 of a license, that license has these different price targets, go ahead, do PLG. Go ahead. Great. Know the infrastructure behind it. Know how that's hooking into your core systems. Have a source of truth your sales team can access and make sure it feeds to finance when you do it, because don't make it an engineering exercise. Please. It cannot be a full engineering exercise to change pricing. On the usage side, when should you do usage is the point where you have actual costs per use.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a product and you're calculating gross margin every time it's sold, most SaaS companies are built on the idea of you build a thing once and then sell it at infinite volume.
Mm-hmm.
In an AI world, that doesn't really work because you have compute costs and you have compute every single time someone uses it.
Yeah.
And so if you're in that world, if you're calculating margin every single time someone uses a product, then you should move over to a usage model. And that requires a special system behind it.
And I'm going to go back to something you said earlier about pricing. One of the things that's a huge red flag for me is when people are afraid of being transparent about their pricing because they're not sure their customers will understand all the variation. That is not a good fit for PLG.
Yeah.
No.
If you don't know what your team is pricing something and you don't fully understand every single way a product is sold, don't put it on your website.
Mm-mm.
Maybe put your trial on the website and people can sign up for the trial and that feeds into it and has a conversation. But if you don't have a very strong, this is what my product costs at this volume, this is what it costs at this volume, this is what it costs at this volume, and that never changes, you're not ready for PLG.
Yes. So good example of actually usage-based and PLG. I think of platforms like Opus Pro, video editing, where you have a certain number of hours or minutes being processed and outcomes that are coming out of that. The pricing is super transparent. You buy a package up front, all the pricing is laid out, and then you may have an overcharge if you go over your allotted hours. Sometimes that's storage-based, sometimes that's processing very specific units. That all makes sense. And pet peeve, if you offer a free trial, you are not PLG unless they can then convert into themselves using the tool.
Companies that do a great job of this, like Clay does a great job of this, they've got a killer free trial directly into a usage situation. Mm-hmm. But the idea is if you can't do an in-app upsell, you're not PLG. If you have a free trial on your website, people sign up for the free trial, They implement it themselves. And then they get into the website and your application, they can add licenses, they can add credits, they can add whatever. If they can do that, then you're good. You're golden. Like, that's PLG. That makes sense. It works. But again, you need to know your pricing model. You need to know how your products and price books are structured in a clean way, i.e., every variation that can be sold should be accounted for on your website or in your app. The idea behind product-led growth is, yes, the highway, instead of being an opportunity to order pipeline, is literally just the highway. 99% of people go through your website and you never have to talk to them. Ever. It's the enterprise level that you end up needing to drive home.
So before I ask you a wacky question, anything else I didn't ask you about that you'd like to bring up here?
That the one big word of warning to those who are just jumping into this pool, like maybe you've implemented a basic system, you've implemented one of the many, is that understand there are two pieces. Understand the data model for the system you're jumping into. If there are lingering questions in your brain, don't jump forward. You have to know how objects interact. It's like, in one of the things for new specifically is I can tell you at every single stage of the journey exactly where the particular data that you're talking about is going to end up. I know the entire pipeline, and you should know that for CPQ. And if you have holes in your brain, which we all do, around where those things are going to end up, go and try to get an answer for yourself. Number one, because the reality is this is all becoming financial data, and every unknown turns into something that gets billed to a customer. The other side is when your finance team says, we don't want to be involved in a CPQ conversation, that means you're not ready for CPQ. And you shouldn't implement it, because the places we see CPQ implementations fail is when finance isn't involved or they don't have visibility into what's happening on the CPQ side. If they're not in the conversation and don't want to be, don't start it, and figure out what you can do from opportunity products. Again, I'm happy to talk to anyone. I've convinced more people not to buy a CPQ in the last year than I have convinced to buy. And so actually, I think my primary job at New is convincing people not to buy our product, which is fun.
Yeah, I mean, the salesperson's not going to do it. And,
Yeah.
you know, there's ACP and UCP, and unacceptable customer profile is not great.
Yeah.
Churn. No.
Don't enjoy that.
No, it's not great. So wacky question.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I love wacky questions.
Value-based pricing, real thing or pipe dream?
Oh my God. Our ROAS. Return on ad spend.
Or you hit my trigger button. Don't do it.
The reality is value-based pricing is a mess. Is it real value? Is it intrinsic value? Who's measuring it? Where are the backstops on what is right and what is wrong? How are you closing yourself off to conflict on the other side? Google actually does this fairly well. Just Camela's reaction. It's not great. And so
No, and they've literally been caught fudging the numbers. It's documented.
the reality is, at the end of the day, you need to 100% trust the source of truth around what that value is. And so if you're trying to figure out value from your customer side, you need to trust the data coming in this world for a long time. How many companies have you been at where you trust the data?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The answer should be none.
Well, and then the other side of this is every time a CEO brings this up, I'm like, have you ever been in a company where you do a proof of concept? And immediately they go, oh, good point. Because what happens is typically upfront, you define what success is. And a lot of times, even if you hit that success, the client says, not feeling it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that one scares me.
Honestly, I think that it is terrifying. And one final note, going back to your question about PLG.
Yeah.
Which is, and I left this out and I didn't mean to, but now it came back to me, which is, if you have retention issues in your implementation, don't do PLG. Just full stop, fix your stuff, fix your product, fix your retention issues, and then go do PLG. It easier for people to churn off while you're trying to figure out how to make your product work.
If you have an onboarding process, don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's not scary, James is going to be speaking at RevOpsAF 2025 in New Orleans, and you are going to have a much more robust session where people can ask questions like, if I can't use formula fields, what should I be using? Very excited.
I'm really excited because we're going to have, of course, I'm going to be there because I'm speaking, but I'm also going to have someone who is much more technical than me and much more in the weeds on the engineering side. Matt Piper from LeafLink is going to be joining me there, and I'm incredibly excited for this because he's got a depth of technical knowledge around CPQ that there are honestly few people I've seen get there, like to that level. And then it's going to be a great session. I'm really excited because we're going to walk through everything. I might have a demo for people if they want some back-end processes that they can build without a CPQ.
Nice. And this is coming from someone who had to build a flow from scratch in front of a potential client on a call. So that's high praise.
I still have trauma from that. It shook me a little bit, but this morning, you'll appreciate this. I spent this morning building Apex to automate change orders in a system where I don't have new installed. Currently, I've got CPQ and new running in the same system, but I did a bunch of Apex to automate the change orders, and let me tell you, it's not that much fun.
No, that's why I went to marketing. But then you bring up ROAS, and I remember why that probably wasn't a good idea either.
Love to demand generation people. You guys are doing the work, and I appreciate it, but also it's hard to make measurable and successful at the same time.
Where can people find you to network, and where can they learn more about New?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. My email is super easy, and I'm going to give it out on a podcast, which is dumb, but james@new.io. Very easy to reach out to. If you're selling me stuff, I might not respond. If you want to learn more about New, we've got a lot of great videos on our website, great testimonials, a lot of information. You can always reach out to me. I'm happy to meet with anyone at any time to talk about CPQ, what not to do. Like, don't even do it if it's not about New. Like, reach out to me no matter what. Or you can hit the see a demo button on our site and talk to one of our team who are amazing, and they won't try to sell you a thing that doesn't work for you. I know most salespeople do that. We don't. So happy to talk to anyone. Reach out to me anytime, and I'm excited.
Wonderful. Generous. Thank you, and see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep your RevOps safe, y'all.